Welcome to the 9 elements of a person-centered system. This is session 9. We're focused on quality management, and we really are focused on the quality management system. Quality management as a system is a whole series of activities that, when put together, help us move towards a person-centered system, help us evaluate how we're moving, where there are opportunities for improvement, where we are doing well. So we're presenting today by myself, Michael Smull, Tanya Richmond, Bob Sattler, and Mary Lou Bourne. Tanya's going to review the agenda with you.
So today we're going to focus on a shift with quality within our systems and also talk about how important it is to look at alignment across our organizations, but also across our systems. We will touch on the topics of both effectiveness and efficiency and tie that back to some concepts we've talked about in the past, and then we'll give you some ideas for next steps inside your organizations and ask you what you'd like to do with this information. I'll introduce you to the elephant that are representative of the element of quality management. In this picture, they are all facing forward, looking at a tape measure. So really a foundation of measurement and quality management with everyone's focus on the same measures. So they're all looking forward and looking in the same direction.
As Tanya said, we wanted to do some review from previous sessions. So I really wanted to reintroduce you to the paradigm shift that we focused on in our last session to really think about how, as we look at alignment, we really need to think about the system as a whole. It's not just about planning. It really is about every component, starting with the assumption that we operate from, looking at our intake processes, our assessment processes, how that relates to planning, quality management, which is what we'll be focusing on today, and how that all pulls together. And really looking at the financial responsiveness, how we really look at what are we funding, how are we funding it, and moving from that power over concept where it's something is wrong with somebody who's receiving supports to really moving toward how do we help build on capabilities that people have, strengths that people have, unique gifts and talents that people have, and how do we use the system to provide supports for the areas where they need assistance. And at the same time, building on those capacities so we have a power with system. So let me turn it over to Tanya so she can focus more on the quality management piece of things.
So if we think about where we are currently and where we need to move for with quality management, currently in many systems, there is a focus on service delivery, and it may not be necessarily on the impact. So regardless of impact, licensure is designed to identify what's wrong. So we look for gaps, we look for things that aren't going well within an agency, sometimes across a system. And all of our priorities in that aspect are really on how do we come into compliance. So we focus very much on things that are outside of our organizations or things that may even be pressuring the system, with minimum standards being the policy. Where we'd like to go to are organizations and systems that are more oriented toward results. So sharing responsibility across our systems, really thinking about the role that each plays in having better impacts, better lives for the people who use services and supports in our systems, and really focusing on relationships inside and between organizations and systems, with licensure and monitoring roles being more for technical assistance. So a side-by-side or shared power among people who are monitoring organizations, helping people understand the importance of the work they do and how it connects to a larger picture and aligns with values across systems. And also as verifiers that the quality is in place.
So let's take a look at quality management principles. This comes from the American Society for Quality. And here we see a large balloon that talks about quality management principles, and then a whole series of smaller balloons around the big balloon that talk about each principle individually. And it begins with customer focus, then goes to leadership, and then goes to engagement, process approach improvement, evidence-based decision-making, and relationship management. We think about this, we see that there's significant overlap between these principles and what we've already reviewed in the earlier 8 elements: the importance of outcomes for people, the importance of leadership, the importance of advocacy, the focus on having things move forward. But there are also ways in which this looks at it in slightly different terms and tells you the importance of people being trained specifically in quality management. While there's significant overlap and while they work well together, there's also difference. In a quality management system, you look at every single approach and you look at those approaches from the perspective of, are they aligned, but also are they effective and efficient? You look for opportunities for improvement rather than allocation of blame. And you're collecting data that lets you make evidence-based decisions. All of these are pieces of the quality management training that we need to have present in our system.
So, as Michael just indicated, quality needs to be across all of those previous elements. And it could be at a systems level, or it may be at an organizational level, depending on which element is. For example, if we look at vision, mission, and values, that may be more of an organizational quality management. And really looking at, if we have our values guiding our day-to-day behavior, is that really happening? And can we measure that from a quality measurement standpoint? When we look at external and internal advocacy, how are we really looking at those partnerships? And are those partnerships really moving us to where we want to go? That may be a combination of organization and system measurements. As we look at our changing system, we need to be developing different partnerships. So how are we measuring that, if that's occurring or not? And is that successful? When we look at trauma-informed discovery, that is a planning process that we're looking at. Are we recognizing where trauma may exist, and is it being addressed in a way that works for the person? And how are we doing that? Definitely identifying the outcomes that people want, something the system already measures, organizations already measure. Are we having alignment between the system and the organization to really make sure that the outcomes reflect what is important to a person, and that there's a thread throughout the planning process that shows we have listened to what people want. We have developed strategies that may be more in line with services and health and safety needs that help accomplish the outcomes. In supporting the supporters, that definitely could be an organizational and systemic standpoint to really thinking about, what are we doing to support the workforce in a way that makes sense? What are we doing to support natural supports in a way that makes sense? And are we expanding that? Or are we just relying on the limited resources that our system has? We need to be looking at resources differently, paid and unpaid. And how are we measuring that to see if that's actually happening? And if we look at the organizational and team culture, not necessarily a systems issue from a measurement standpoint, but definitely from an organizational standpoint, how are we really measuring? Are we getting to that culture we want, where it's a learning culture? There's accountability and there is partnership. How are we measuring that? We often talk about lead change with stories, manage change with data. We need that data, and that's part of the quality management system. And Mary Lou Bourne has really put together a nice piece on that with the self-assessment. So I'm going to turn it over to her and let her share her thoughts about that.
Thanks so much, Bob. Hi, everybody. It's really a pleasure to talk with you about my favorite subject, quality management. And we will take a look at, we can go ahead and move on to the next slide and take a look at how all of these pieces fit together. And you've heard really a number of times already from Bob, both Bob and Michael, and the piece that Tanya was speaking of, really looking at how all of the functions fit together. And part of why we chose to include the self-assessment for government administrative agencies in this learning collaborative is really because of the similarities. And with the 9 elements, you can see here, we've covered a number of these areas throughout the lessons so far, throughout the sessions that we've had with you so far. And as we talked about last time, alignment is kind of the ribbon that flows between all of the different pieces of this fabric. Alignment is really making sure that the weaves, that the fabric all fits tightly, the individual threads all fit together nice and tightly. And quality is something that is embedded, or you want to make sure it's embedded in everything. So when we look at the first section where quality is specifically called out, on the next slide, you'll see that we're talking about quality and innovation in person-centered systems. And so in the world of quality, there are a number of different activities that groups engage in. One of them is something that is often referred to as quality assurance. We've talked a little bit already about complying with minimum standards, which is typically the role of licensing For example, there are other bodies, there are other things that organizations in human services do to demonstrate their compliance with minimum standards. And we want to make sure that people understand that's an important part of quality assurance. But quality improvement and moving on to quality improvement is a slightly different, higher level skill, if you will. And so moving in towards, we're using quality to spur and kind of be the catalyst for innovation is something that you can intentionally do. And so when you look at the self-assessment tool, which I hope all of you have found it, we'll make sure that the link is available to you in the chat when we get together on that last Monday this month. You really want to look at how the pieces in section 8 tie together. So section 8, 8.1, we'll talk about mission and standards. So it's not just mission, vision, and values. We covered that already. It's clear that there are things you do there. But how does that relate to setting the standards? And then in section 8.2, it's really crucial that we learn from the people who are supported by your organizations, other people who benefit from it. So for example, it might be extended family members in some situations. And also, quite importantly, how do you learn from your workforce? And then section 8.3, it's very common, particularly if you are a local or a state government agency, it's very common to think about quality on as an expectation of your external agencies. But we also want to help you think about quality internally. How do we know that our own internal practices are carried out with the learning approach and with the way that is constantly seeking innovation in our own procedures? So to look at the details on the next slide, we'll look a little bit at, and these, again, we had not planned to really do a deep dive into the self-assessment, but just to help you know that it's there in case this is an area that you might have an interest or a need for. So really, this particular piece evolves from that very first entry-level step, which is around having a mission, vision, and value statement that are spoken aspirations, but there are no clear standards for those who do reviews to understand if that mission, vision, and values is actually being implemented and carried out. So evolving from, yes, we have that, but we don't have the clear standards, to that highest level, which is the clear standards are available and they apply to not just the service delivery, the direct contact, but they also apply to our administrative functions and all of the monitoring and oversight. That includes a focus on learning and innovation. So one of the things for leaders on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about taking a few moments, and you may want to take a few moments right now as you're watching the video, or you may just want to jot this down or take a look at the slides, maybe at a point that's more convenient for you sometime later in the next week or two, to really think about how do you assure that all aspects of your agency understands their role in assuring high quality person-centered services. So this, I liken this sometimes to finances. And people often say, oh, finance, well, that's that department over there. We have a finance department. But everybody needs to know budgeting. Everybody has, in various levels, has responsibility for assuring some accountability for the finances, whether it's petty cash for direct support frontline workers, or the overall responsibility for balancing the budget at the highest level of the agency. So how do you help your staff understand that implementing your mission, vision, and values is linked to quality and is everybody's responsibility? How intentional are you about that? On the next slide, so with section 8.2, we really look at learning from various people in your system to inform improvement opportunities. And it is a mindset around seeing all improvement as an opportunity to do perhaps more, perhaps it's better, perhaps it is more timeliness, more accuracy. So opportunities to improve in whatever way is a mindset that you want to try to establish when you're moving towards quality improvement. And thinking about learning is helpful. rather than in a blame culture, as we'll talk about a little bit later, where there is really more of an interest in assigning blame and holding somebody responsible. So in this particular section, one of the key pieces in doing that is listening to and learning from the people who are involved in your system at various different levels. So this particular piece evolves from, we have a quality council, and it is primarily agency staff, and then to the more advanced stages in learning from people to recognize improvement opportunities, which is we use both data and the perceptions and perspectives of people to inform our quality opportunities and to look at and identify areas that need improvement. So some of what we talk to people about in this is there is quality by fact and there is quality by perception. And there are two different types of data. And one of those comes directly from people's experience, from their perspective, their perception of how things are experienced, up to then and including data by fact, which is things like, was the planning done on time? Did the plan get implemented? Is there evidence of people actually having the services and then reaching the outcomes that they're interested in? So that really comes then in, let's think about some leadership questions on the next slide. So one of the things for you to reflect on is, as a leader in your system, how is it that you assure that you personally receive input from the people you serve, as well as how does your organization intentionally receive input from the people you serve? And are there areas for improvement and progress that you're making? Do you then continuously loop back and receive input from people on your progress? In the world of Baldrige, and actually in many of the formal quality frameworks that exist, they call these listening posts. And do you have an intentional way to establish and create listening posts that help you receive the voice of the customer, the voice of the workers, the voice of your employees, and the voice of your suppliers, which is an interesting concept in human services. But the people who, your provider agencies, those of you who work for provider agencies, you supply the services that are so critically needed. And so thinking through how is the voice of all of those folks included in your intentional improvement opportunities. So on the last section, we're going to talk a little bit about learning from internal quality practices. So this one evolves from our quality staff are clear who they are. They're easy to identify. We all know who the quality management unit is, but we don't have a formal quality strategy. We don't have an intentional plan for quality improvement per se. And this moves all the way up to the fifth or the highest level in this assessment, which is we do have a fully developed performance excellence system, and we have public, transparent reporting of all of our person-centered practices. So thinking about what are those practices and how can you report on them in a fact-based as well as a perception-based method or model is one of the things that you as a leader can really help coach your team through and walk your team through a formal process. And remember, the way that the assessment is designed, as you there would be ideally a whole team of your staff from your agency who rate and rank in each one of these sections how far and where, which of these statements best describes where your agency is today. And then we would collect them. We can collect all of those and put together an average or a range, and so that you'll see where your agency stands. And then by simply looking, so for example, on average, you happen to be at a 2. Our internal quality strategy includes a structured methodology, but we're not quite at the point where each individual unit has its own standards and measures. Then that gives you an idea of where you start and what the focus would be for your organization by looking at if we've already accomplished level 2, but most of us agree we haven't quite hit level 3, then that's where you would start. So that's how the assessment is designed. And we can certainly help you with that if it's something that you are interested in doing. Internal quality practices are typically a really good way to learn about your own, how before you start to expect this level of engagement with quality of your agencies or your sister agencies, others you work with. It really helps to practice it internally first. So the last piece that we'll look at with section 8.3 are the questions on how do you develop your internal quality strategy? Do you have input? Do you have others who have provided input, including external stakeholders, which sometimes is, people say, wait, this is an internal quality strategy. But the work that you do is often experienced by others. And so getting their input on how they experience their engagement with your staff, for example. Are you quick and timely with responses? Or decisions made quickly? Do people have clear instructions? So there's a lot of things that you can ask your external stakeholders that actually inform your internal improvement opportunities. So one of the things to think about is how do you actually develop your own internal strategy? So when we look at the last slide, each one of these sections so far, we have taken the last piece with this person-centered practice self-assessment to really think about alignment. And now we're really looking, as Michael mentioned, across all 8 pillars. And I say 8 because we look at alignment as one of those, the 9th pillar that ties them all together. So how does quality and innovative practice provide an opportunity for you to create alignment? So how does it, perhaps it's, there's lots of analogies we can use, but perhaps it's the loom that pulls all those threads together. If you're thinking of, if we continue with the fabric analogy. But really, if you would reflect on and describe, maybe jot down a couple of notes on the quality improvement and how it links together. Is it the alignment structure? Do all of your system pieces fit together and have clear standards, clear expectations, and then a measurement system that tells you whether and how well you're meeting those standards, perhaps exceeding them, and looking for places to continuously improve them. So I think at this point, I will be turning it back over to Bob.
Thanks, Mary Lou. And as Mary Lou's been saying, and as you've been hearing throughout this entire presentation, it really needs to work in unison with everything else that we are doing. So I thought we could take a look at how we've evolved in our system. And we really started with our system. We developed rules and regulations. Are we meeting the expectations of what we expect? And it created a system of largely black and white. Either it's occurring or it's not occurring. And it was uniform and it was applied, and health and safety was the standards that we were looking at. And that's where it led us into really looking at quality and how are we measuring that. And then things started to evolve a bit. We started to look at, it's not just about health and safety, it's also about personal outcomes and what people want. And sometimes that may be in conflict with the black and white system that we've created that's looking at health and safety. And we're looking at different components of things. We are finding that that is really happening now with the HCBS final rule. We are providing services in a person-centered way. Tricky thing about person-centered practices, it's not black and white. It really is shades of gray. And how are we looking at that? So it's not just about health and safety. It's also about context and satisfaction with how those services are impacting the person's life, and are they achieving what they want and what they need in their life. And so there's a lot of challenges about that because that's not exclusively black and white. So we really need to think about how are we pulling all of these 3 major components into alignment with one another. And that is a huge shift from where we have been. And the self-assessment, I think, is great because it takes us step by step how we can evolve our practices to really focus on that. And that will help us really support people in a way that makes sense and support the system in a way that makes sense. And it's a little bit different than what we've been doing. So it will require some things to focus on. So we really need to think about what needs to be considered. So I'm going to pass that over to Tanya so she can talk to you about that.
So we thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about some of the things we have to consider as we talk about quality management. Bob mentioned the home and community-based services rule. And if you remember, that is our overarching federal guidance about person-centered practices in our systems and our organizations. And all of the systems and services of supports for people are expected that we are paying attention to the person when they tell us where they want to live, who they want to live with, so that we're asking those questions. We're making sure that that is put not only into their plans, but put into practice in their lives. What they do with their time, what they do with their resources, the services and supports they receive in the first place, and who provides those services and supports. So in very plain language, there are expectations around choice, and the choice lies with the person whose life it is.
Let's take a look at what is measured. Is it just the standards and process? Are we looking at paper compliance? Do we have a system in place where the minimal standards are looked at as all you need to achieve? They are the ceiling and not the floor. And goals are not focused on outcomes, but on scope, frequency, and duration. And we reinforce blame culture by looking for what is wrong, not looking for opportunities for improvement. All of this reinforces a culture where we're not looking at outcomes and satisfaction. We need a culture where we're looking at what's important to people, and that what's important to people creates a path where people are moving to the lives that they desire, that they're seeking, where there's satisfaction. There's also feeling that they are contributing, and there's purpose and meaning. Health and safety is addressed, but it's addressed in the context of the person's life, the same way we address issues of health and safety for ourselves. And we're really looking at, are we getting the results? Are we meeting the promises that we have been making to people and those who do the work? And is there accountability for when those results are met and not met?
To put this all in context, I want to share a little story with you about Anna. Anna is somebody that I've had the, I would say, honor of supporting for a number of years. And Anna is somebody who's a very creative person. She's a very proud person, doesn't really want to accept social assistance, and is a survivor. She has had one heck of a life. And it's caused her to be mistrustful and very paranoid, actually. She refuses to take medication. She has a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, and she is especially paranoid of medical professionals because of some of the experiences she had in the past. And she is somebody who has this phobia of germs, and this phobia that people are out to get her. And we were providing supports to her and had her in an apartment. And she believed that people would break in when she wasn't there and spread germs all over her apartment. So she would throw her furniture through the window because she felt that it was infected with germs. And she would prefer to live on the streets where she wouldn't be subjected to people coming into her apartment. Now, kind of a strange dichotomy of having this paranoia of germs and living on the streets, but that's where she felt safe. And we had the apartment for her. We know that furniture was going to be thrown through the windows because she felt that they were infected with germs. And it was kind of a challenging situation. Having her living on the streets was a danger for her. Having her in an apartment was a place where she could be safe and secure. Having furniture in the apartment wasn't the best. In fact, we once got her a waterbed, and she saw the fibers in the waterbed and felt that there was something in it. So she took a knife to it and got rid of the waterbed. And one of the things that worked well for her was having an apartment that didn't have furniture in it. It was a place where she could go. It was a place that she could feel safe, but it didn't necessarily meet the standards. Because she was going to be on the streets a lot, she would often throw away the keys to her apartment, saying, I don't need any keys. So we had a next door neighbor in the apartment next door who had a key for her. Whenever she wanted a key, she could get the key and go into the apartment. So she had a place where she could be safe. We had a monitoring come through and look at how services were done. And Anna was somebody who was being safe. She had the apartment available to her when she wanted it. She had a place to stay safe. She had a place and a phone to call folks. And it didn't have any furniture in it because she didn't want furniture in it. She didn't feel safe with furniture in it because she felt people were spreading germs all over it. But the apartment also had pots and pans, had a kitchen so she could cook. She would prefer to sleep on the counters in the kitchen. She would take baths in bleach to get rid of germs. She was somebody who did a lot of things that were not healthy for her. And a lot of that was because she refused to take medication. We can't make people take medication, but we can at least provide a safe place for them should they choose to use that or not. And she would use the apartment. Monitoring came in. Monitoring saw that the apartment was empty. So I got this monitoring report back that said we had lots of deficiencies because there was no furniture in the apartment. There was no reference at all to all the supports that were being provided to her to help her stay safe, to help her stay alive, to help her not be a story on the front page of the newspaper. It was a situation where our quality management system was really at odds between a system perspective, as Mary Lou was talking about perspectives, and a provider perspective to really help this woman stay alive and have a place to stay where she would not be victimized. And it really looks at how do we as a system start to merge those two perspectives so we can look at health and safety in the perspective of the person, in the context of the person, so that they have the life that they want, they can continue to grow. I continue to support Anna, and Anna's in a much different space right now. Anna now takes medication. Anna looks at the world through different eyes. She's still very distrustful. She's got a very small circle of people she supports, but she's living someplace and she's got furniture. Now, this took about 15 years to make this all happen, but it happened because we looked at what was important to the person, what was important for the person, and started to really look at how do we build this in context in a way that makes sense. Quality doesn't happen in a year's time in some cases. We need to look at how do we support people where they are at, and how do we as a system help support that in a way that makes sense. And that's a bit of a challenge. And it requires that we look at different skills, which I think Tanya is going to be talking to us about.
So in summary, if we're going to think about skills that would be useful, and our task is really to think about quality management types of measures, quality management practices, we need specific training in our organizations and in our system for understanding where we have quality and where things can be improved. That training is at a higher level. It may help us understand the data better and how we are aligned. But there are also skills that are helpful inside our organizations that may help us tell some of the stories that are connected to the data that help us have a clearer picture. And I think Bob's story nicely illustrates how data sometimes may not tell the whole story from a perspective of outcomes for the person themselves. And the same is true of stories. They don't show the whole picture of quality as well. So person-centered thinking may be married with quality management skills. We want to make sure that everybody who is in a person's life understands how to write outcomes or develop outcomes that are person-centered and individual in nature, so that they describe from a person's perspective at an individual level what life looks like in balance. It also really impresses on us that we have to move from a perspective that is black and white to one where there is some tolerance for shades of gray, that we can really look at that overlap and see where the story is actually telling us the story of a good life for a person versus where the data is not supporting that our system, our organization to inform one another and create change in partnership. It's helpful to look at accountability from a standpoint of the results that we are getting in individual lives, but also across our organizations and systems, because the kind of change management that is most helpful when we think about value-based skills, organizations that serve people from a value base, is value-based change management.
So skills alone, the assessment alone, isn't going to make this all happen. It's not going to be easy. And it's not easy because we have developed a quality management system that we are comfortable with. We know that we are being consistent when we look at, is it there or is it not there? And that's how we've been operating. But now with all of this person-centered focus, it changes the dynamics. And that can be a little bit scary. You know, I kind of equate it to like those New Year's Eve goals where we say, you know, I am going to get healthy. This is my year to get healthy. I am going to lose weight. I am going to go to the gym. And it starts on January 1st. And when we start that process, how long does that last? It doesn't last because we start to panic when we make a mistake. If we look at our quality management system going from a black and white structure to one that's full of shades of gray, that may cause a lot of panic for folks. And it may be for many different reasons. Maybe they don't feel they have the skills to make that happen. Maybe they are concerned about the one situation that is not going to go well. And so that causes us to panic. And when we panic, we immediately revert back to our comfort zone, and we strengthen our comfort zone because of some of the unsuccessful attempts that may have happened. If we really want this to work, it really is about working in partnership with organizations, with the system, with those using services and supports, and collectively thinking about how we can stretch our perspectives and our approaches to really work together to make that happen. And when we stretch our comfort zone, we become more comfortable with doing things in a different way. So we really need to think about the assessment. I think is a great way for us to do that. It lets us know step by step where we can go. It is a way for us to stretch our comfort zones so we can get to a point where, and a place where we are supporting people in a way that makes sense, where health and safety is in context to what is important to the person, where we are really evaluating the stories and the data together to really make sure that things are working well for the person. It's going to take time. As we move forward, and in order to prepare for our session when we get together on October 24th, I want you to think of that Venn diagram about that alignment piece, and what does it look like between rules and regulations and personal outcomes and quality management? How does it all start to align? How does the self-assessment help provide some structure to make that alignment occur? Look at your current system. Where are there strengths in regard to this alignment of quality management and this shift from a health and safety compliance focus to a person-centered focus, and how do they all work together? Where are there opportunities for improvement? What sort of things need to happen for those who are doing quality management from a skill development standpoint, from a quality management knowledge base to really move things forward? And what do we need to do to really start to make that shift from that power over quality management system to a power with quality management system? As you think about that, we'll come back together on October 24th, again from 2 o'clock to 3:30 Eastern Standard Time, so we can share our thoughts, we can share our knowledge, we can share our experiences with each other, so we can collectively figure out how to strengthen our system. We want to thank you for your time today, and if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to reach out to us. Here's our emails, and we look forward to seeing you on the 24th. Thank you.